Dr. Elouise, it's nighttime for you. You are in jet setter mode.
I am. I'm in Zurich right now, and I was in Munich or Augsburg specifically on Thursday and Friday, so I'm a little jet lagged.
Well, I am in the Bay Area today and it is beautiful. It's going to be like 75 today.
Nice,
And
love
I
that.
am looking forward to doing a hike after we record.
Ah, very nice. Yeah, I just walked down to, or I went down to downtown Zurich and ate dinner, and then I walked back, and it was a really nice little walk.
So I have to ask before we dive into our topic for today, what the veg or the vegan food scene is like there.
There's surprisingly a number of options, and there's several vegan restaurants or vegan vegetarian. They tend to be a little more combined here. But yeah, I've been very pleased with the selection, and yeah, I've eaten pretty well.
I always think about that. I know sometimes when I travel, I have a hard time and I'm not as extreme. I'm only vegetarian. So I think about what would Dr. Eloise do if she were here right now?
Well, and I will say like Germany in general is very vegan friendly, or at least what they do really well is identify what's vegan. And so even I went to the small town of Augsburg, which is about an hour outside of Munich. It was There were plenty of vegan options there, and everything was labeled. And again, here there everything's labeled, and I've been very like thrilled with the options.
Well, I think 10 years ago you wouldn't be saying this. So
No,
I feel
no,
like
no,
we've
no,
come a
no.
long way.
Exactly. Hey, I'm not complaining. It's all good.
So you had sent me a video a few weeks ago about a topic, and I thought this is so interesting. So we're gonna chat about it today. So Dr. Ross, let's have you intro what we're gonna talk about because I think this is really, really interesting, in particular for parents with kids that are in high school or college, or if you are actually starting out in your career, because I think this is something that we're going to hear more about.
Yeah, so two shout outs on this one. I was having a chat with our friend of the show, Mike Cadieux, who I don't know how we got down this rabbit hole, but we were just talking about AI, and he's like, at this point, my plumber makes more than me. I'm thinking about going back and studying to become a plumber, and then going to make like because plumbers in his area, as in my area, make six figures. So and I was like, yeah, exactly. And the folks in the trades are in high demand. And then a couple weeks later, my brother, he told me his son, his oldest son, I should say, is looking to go into the military, and he wants to study diesel engines or become a diesel mechanic. And I thought that was a brilliant idea. And in fact, I plan to write a LinkedIn post about this. Now, subsequently, it sounds like he's going to switch and become a nuclear tech, but same idea. And it really, and at the same time, of course, every day I read about the tens of thousands of jobs that are high tech jobs that are getting eliminated. And we know that this is the sort of foreshadowing of what's going to happen in the corporate world. And I actually think we are at this reckoning of maybe blue collar jobs are coming back. And I just want to, or certainly we need them, and we'll talk about more why that is and some stats where Gen Z is really looking uh, at blue collar jobs. But this comes at a time when people are younger folks are questioning college, the value of a college degree, and pushing back against this march of tech or this unabated march of technology. And I just want to add one more bit of context. to this. Growing up in the 80s and 90s, prior to the 80s and 90s, there were a lot. So in high schools, there were a lot of on the job training for construction, automotive, uh, other trades related work. And I remember in high school, there was a construction class, there we had an automotive shop, and it was called ROP, Regional Occupation, something or another. But it felt like it was at the very tail end of it, and there was a big push away, and eventually those programs seemed to either be sidelined or eliminated. I don't know which, but they definitely fell out of the what seemed to be the collective consciousness. So there's been a big push away, and now we're moving much more towards, hey, we need a lot more people with hands-on skills. So that's the that's the big wind up for this episode.
So when I was in high school, we did not have any of those types of classes. It was very, very much more tech computer focused. You had foreign language, which was a big push, but there was very, very minimal. I don't even know what we call those, like trades type classes. At least at my high school, that was absolutely something that was not a thing. And my three younger sisters went to a different high school than I did, which was much larger than mine. Same. They did not have, so those classes did not exist or were eliminated before my age was going into high school where we grew up. So just a little bit of context there. And then I'll also say that in my family, we do have kind of a base in the trades, and that my uncle Pete decided not to go to college. And when he graduated high school, he went into roofing, and he
Mm,
worked for roofing companies and then started his own company. He owns a very, very successful roofing and solar business in the Monterey Carmel area.
mm,
And so his 40 plus years career has been building and running a roofing and solar business. And so that's kind of how I know about the trades is looking at the family business. And my cousins, his daughters have all worked in the business. His oldest daughter and husband are now taking over kind of day-to-day operations. So the company will be staying in the family. But that being said, it's a very, very lucrative business, and there's a
mhm.
lot of demand for roofing. So I think while that's not plumbing and electrical engineering, it's definitely something that's, heavily trades focused.
Yeah. Funny you should say that, because the thing about the trades are these very hands-on uh, jobs is that they're not automatable, or fairly not automatable. Although I did, over the course of my watching of a metric ton of TikTok, I did see a robot roofer
Yeah.
that essentially the tiles get fed into the machine and it just goes up and down the roof, nailing in the roof. But that notwithstanding,
Yeah.
you'll go ahead.
So I think kind of looking at kind of before and where we are today, in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, blue collar jobs were kind of the thing. I mean, that was
Yeah.
the backbone of the US economy. That was things like construction, plumbing, manufacturing. That was the very stable career, right? Most people
Hmm.
would go to college and go into a blue collar job, and it was very respectable. There were good wages. Then I feel like 80s, 90s, and 2000s, and I was born 1983, so I fall into that demographic of being raised in a different environment where the economy really shifted towards services and tech and away from these blue collar jobs, making college degrees more synonymous with upward mobility and higher prestige. So that really kind of, I think, was a big shift in the economy.
I would add business jobs that like it seemed like when I was graduating high school and college, everybody was going into business administration, international relations, which sort of sets up that big globalization push we got at the late 90s.
Mhm.
So,
And then I think for me at least, in where I grew up and my family and my community, it was really college equals success.
hmm hmm
And trade jobs were not looked highly upon. It was kind of like, oh, if you're not smart enough or you can't cut it in college, and they were thought to be less cool, less modern, and not as financially rewarding to go into the trade. So for me, at least, it was not something that my sisters and I even really thought of. It was that you go to college and go work in business.
yeah. Yeah, and I think that, well, I know for a fact that is changing dramatically because we had, let's call it 3 decades of people not flocking to those positions, and now there's a huge gap in capacity. And also, not only do we have a gap in like people that can do this work, but you've had these mega disasters going all the way back to Katrina, all the wildfires, too many to count, where you're just basically doing massive rebuilding in these areas, and there's hardly enough labor to go around. To
Yeah.
say, and without sort of getting too political, without immigration crackdowns, and so it is a real need, and yeah.
So I think as I was prepping, I pulled some interesting statistics around AI disruption in white collar work, which I think
hmm
was kind of the premises of that YouTube video that you had sent me a few weeks ago. And some of the stats that I found were generative AI and automation are rapidly transforming what's being called as quote office work.
hmm
30% of work tasks could be automated within the next 3 years. By 2030, one third to one half of all work activities could be automated. So think about that for a second. Think about what you do now and imagine 50% of your job being able to be completely automated.
hmm
Then routine office tasks, so things like data analytics, customer service, paralegal work, are increasingly being handled by AI. We see that in the Salesforce layoff that just happened.
Yep.
A big driver of that was being able to automate customer service support work. That was kind
hmm
of the biggest part of that layoff was tied to AI agents being able to do a lot of the more basic kind of day-to-day customer service support. Couple other examples, Goldman Sachs has found that 25% of legal tasks are going to be automated, contributing to a 15% drop in demand for paralegals, which has already started happening. So people that
hmm
are going into that space are finding it increasingly hard to even get work. And then job postings for software developers, analysts, and other knowledge workers are down 12.7% year over year from 2004 to 2005, and with stagnant wages. So wages are
Yeah.
actually not increasing, or in some cases, I've even seen decreasing.
Yeah.
So just wanted to kind of lay the groundwork. There's a lot of stats out there when you do your chat GPT or Claude or Google searches around like all the disruptions that are happening. In particular, I would say in 2024 and 2025, it's really started to be a thing. In particular, this year when CEOs are now publicly doing layoffs and saying why. I mean, there's no hiding it now. They're just flat out saying because AI is automating so much of the work that our employees have done.
Yeah, and I mean, yeah, as you said, there's a gazillion stats out there on this, and the deeper you get into this, the more you just realize how tenuous these white collar jobs are. I mean, legal, I mean, 10 years ago, I mean, you would have been hard pressed to think that like lawyers could ever go away. And then to be clear, they're not going to all go away, but all of this paralegal work, even some sort of
Yeah.
contracting work. I mean, it's just like, and that's just one element. Our world procurement, a lot of the procurement work is going to go away. Again, I think it's going to morph into other things, but IT work has been steadily on the decline, especially if you look at systems administration and network administration, some of these jobs that hardly even exist anymore. Software coders is like that's the big thing we see in the Bay Area right now. So, I mean, it's a very real thing, and it's going to force, I believe, it's going to force a labor rationalization in the white collar market.
So let's talk a little bit about why blue collar jobs are rising in value. And if we already talked about the stating the obvious, AI cannot nearly as easily replace physical manual on-site work. Now, not to say that companies aren't diving into robotics and working on trying to build robots that will potentially be incorporated in commercial work and in people's homes. But when you're looking at short term, it's way less likely that AI is going to automate this physical work versus the, office type work.
Well, and I think there's a technological aspect to it. So you really want to automate things that are automatable. You don't want to just like automate to automate. And there's a lot of economies of scale when you look at, let's just talk about white collar work, because or knowledge work in particular. If you can teach an AI agent to reason and to interpret data and even take some basic actions based on that, well, that that cuts across the entirety of the of the services or knowledge work. So everything from banking to legal to you name it. Whereas if you look at even just a manufacturing or warehouse or logistics, what you see that's automated are things that make sense. An assembly line where the robot, you're going to teach it once and then it's going to keep doing that one thing.
Highly repetitive tasks.
Yeah, there you go. Thank you. So these highly repetitive tasks, but then you start to look at things like like fixing an electrical panel, like where you have to troubleshoot it. Like the AI can't do that, a robot can't do that. I mean, okay, sure, in 50 years in some far-flung future, but not in the foreseeable future. And I have a stat that says that electrician employment's expected to go um, up by 11% in the next, like 5, 6, 7 years. So, and it's because at some point you have to go connect breakers and turn them on and do troubleshooting and do things that a robot in essence can't do or wouldn't make sense to have a robot do, at least for the foreseeable future. And this gets to other things, and this is why I think my nephew going in to become a diesel mechanic is an amazing idea because diesel engines are everywhere. They're in boats, they're in generators, they're in data centers, and
I mean, think about military. I
military,
mean,
exactly. So being able to fix diesel engines, like a robot's not going to do that because where you find diesel engines are not conducive places for robots. So I think it's a great idea. And I also think nuclear technicians, which is his other option or the thing he's considering, also makes a lot of sense. I totally love that idea because we talked about this with data centers, 3 Mile Island's getting spun back up. I expect more nuclear facilities to be built in the future, whether in the US or elsewhere. So power is a huge as we've talked, a huge power generation is a huge growth area, and underpinning that is all kinds of diesel mechanics, electrical work, et cetera, et cetera. So I think, like, if I'm looking at, should I should I go be a lawyer or should I go fix diesel engines? At this point, I'm like diesel engines.
Well, and so I was curious around wages, right? And
Hmm.
so here's a couple stats I wanted to share. Construction workers are up 18.4% as it relates to wage growth. And in the US in 2020, looks the site that I pulled it from said salaries um, are often at, starting at 75K. And I would argue that that's more than teachers make who
Oh yeah,
require school
yeah,
and extended education.
yep.
Plumbers have seen a 17.5% wage increase in the US since 2020, with salaries up to $99,000 a year in high demand areas. So, I mean, imagine starting being new in something and getting to 99,000 in your first 5 years. I mean, again, that's just significant. And then
And actually, can I interject just on that? So it's 75K or what, 100K in your
75K for construction.
right. And if you go into that out of high school, you don't have the college debt
Yeah.
or and that, I think that's where the economics really favor that blue collar approach.
Yeah, and I would say then you have a lot of people who go beyond 4 years and are getting extended degrees, which
Yeah.
again is further limiting your ability to go get a full-time job and start earning, a more traditional salary versus just doing part-time work. And then you've got even more debt if you're doing extended education. And then I looked up electricians. I found a stat, for example, in New Jersey in 2025, average electricians make $98,000 a year, which is a
Yep.
21% increase from historical. And then wind turbine technicians, which is
Mm,
something I think is going to be a real growth area. Average pay right now in the US is $87,000 a year with a 60% job growth projected by 2033.
yeah. And by the way, I had a stat that plumbers in high demand areas, so metro area, sort of urban areas, 99,000 a year.
Yeah. So I think it was important to share this wage information because it gives some groundwork and context that we're talking about relatively quick ability to get into a six-figure income without going to traditional school.
Absolutely. And I do wonder, in my TikTok, we got to come up with something for my TikTok obsession. Is I did watch, I somehow they come up in my feed where I've seen some workers working on the wind turbine, just going back to that, and where they climb up to the top and they fix, elements on the blades, and it just looks so freaky. But the other thing that I've also seen is drones. So where
Mhm.
the wind turbine technicians use drones. So in many of these areas, you can start to have the intersection with some interesting technology, even though it's quote unquote blue collar.
Mhm. Yeah, drones is something that we should definitely think about in this type of conversation because I think drone operator
Yeah.
is something else that I think is an interesting career path, and I think we're gonna see more drone work incorporated into the trades.
Yeah, undoubtedly, as we've seen it. I mean, you see it everywhere in real estate listings. And I think you're right, it's going to be more ubiquitous. And I mean, we've certainly seen it in the Ukraine war, and the Ukrainians have blunted a much bigger military force, not to get off topic, but with very sophisticated use of drones. And I think that portends what we will see kind of going forward. So,
Mhm. So let's talk a little bit about this cultural shift that goes along with this type of movement. And again, from what I've seen, this is really falling within the Gen Z. So that's what, 13 to 28-year-olds. So again, folks that are in high school or in college. This is really something for people
or
to think about.
or college age, I should say. We
Yeah,
should say.
college age. So um, from resumebuilder.com, they've got some new research to publish around this whole shift to blue collar, and they published something in May of 2025. So just a couple months ago, that says 4 in 10 young people with degrees. So we're talking about 2 or 4 year degrees from an institution. They're actively choosing blue collar work instead of office work, which is a
Mhm.
major, major shift from even 5 years ago. Key findings is 42% of Gen Zers are now working or pursuing a blue collar or skilled trade. So again, that number was probably less than 10% just 5 years ago. So that's a pretty dramatic increase. And among those with a bachelor's degree, so again, that's a 4 year degree from a accredited institution, 37% of folks are actively choosing blue collar work. Cultural respect for trades is rebounding, and I think that's the really thing, is what the trend behind it. Is it, a cool thing to do? Does it have like a good reputation? And 60% of young people now believe the blue collar work is more respected today than a decade ago. And there's a show that I wanted to call out. It's not something that I watch regular, but I think things like this are helping with this cultural shift. And it's on CNBC and it's called Make It. I don't know, Dr. Elouise, if you've ever seen it, but the show highlights young plumbers, electricians, and welders earning six-figure incomes.
Mhm.
So I think when you have shows like that that become popular and people see it, that's something that they could aspire to be, what that looks like in real life and how much money can actually be made. I think it helps with this shift around making a little bit more cool and acceptable to go into something like that.
I want to, since you brought up the cultural aspect, I because I am I grew up in the 80s, well, sort of 70s and 80s. There was a lot more. There was, and there was a book written about the 70s, a book about the 70s and the change that I studied in grad school. And one of the things that it missed was the cultural change in the 70s, where you had a lot of movies and TVs about blue collar jobs and people and themes. So I'll name a few and date myself, but
We'll see how
there,
many of these I know.
yeah, but Convoy, Smokey and the Bandit, uh, Take This Job and Shove It. Uh, so those would have been some movies. TV show Alice, Diner. What else? And then songs like One Piece at a Time by Johnny Cash, and just these very uh, very, what's the word? I'm just sort of very down to earth, or down to earth representations of people, or more importantly, as with Take This Job and Shove It, this dichotomy between management and labor. And I didn't look up the stats on union membership, but I have to think that unionization sort of played a role in this. And I just want to make one other point that was interesting in the 90s is one of President Bill Clinton's sort of winning themes was the fact that the military industrial complex was starting to decline. Engineering jobs, manufacturing jobs were on the way out in the 90s because of the dissolution of the Soviet Union. One of his messages that resonated was the fact that jobs were going away and the goal was retraining. And you had mentioned that, or I had read, I can't remember, but that there's like the white collar workers now need to
Yeah.
retrain to become blue collar or to do these more hands-on jobs. And I just think it's such a wild, like everything is just cyclical.
And I think that's an interesting point. I also think there's going to be a whole industry that really starts to explode around training and education of the trades. So
Hmm.
imagine you have these, 2,000 people, however, I don't know the exact number that were just laid off from Salesforce,
Oh, it's
and
4,000, I think.
4,000.
Yeah,
So they all need to go get new jobs. Let's say 20% of them decide they need to go into the trades. They've got to learn and get
yeah,
skills.
yeah,
So I think you're going to see both online and in person people really investing in training and education. And I could see that being a really big market for folks to go into because, and then there's things like, learning how to use robots, learning
yeah.
how to use drones. That's a whole nother skill set that people are going to need to learn. So I see if you're somebody who's in education and creative and innovative, that could be a market to look at.
Yeah, my neighbor is a contractor, and I think his company's Green Construction. Shout out to Alex. And one of the things he's been talking about, we walk our dogs together, and periodically, and whenever walk, he laments the fact that he has trouble finding qualified people. And one of his things as he gets older, he wants to really ramp up training programs because the thing that frustrates him is there are very few, or if any, formalized training programs. And I've always sort of every time we talk about it, it does resonate with me that, yeah, I can see, because again, you've had these decades long drought. We're not training in high school. And unless you learn it on the job, it just feels like, where would you go get trained?
I actually think we're going to see a massive change in the public school system, and I hope
Yeah,
that we see trades incorporated. Imagine if all of us in for 4 years of high school learned skills in the trades. I mean, how much more valuable would it be
seriously.
upon
Like,
graduation?
I, yeah, I mean, yeah. The one of my regrets is that I did not learn more. Not that I have any, even if I learned it, because some of the things I've learned over, by owning a house, even if I'd have learned it, I'm terrible at the stuff. But I just would have so much more familiarity with just the basics. Like there's language that's like, what is it that, anyway, like there's just language that just goes right over me. And like the whole amp circuit volts thing, it just makes no sense to me. And it would be, I agree, it should be so helpful. And I just want to make a note about, I mean, in the era of AI, I've been using this in my presentations lately. What's the job of the teacher now? And it
Mhm.
changes. And I'm not saying that I have the answer, but we're not going to prevent students from using ChatGPT. Maybe in 2025, maybe 2026, but at a certain point, it's stupid. And I remember back in,
Well, you can't. Even if you wanted to, you can't.
right, right. And why would you hold people back, or sorry, kids back from learning these very necessary skills? Because that's clearly the world they're going to occupy. And I remember when I was in grade school, we couldn't use calculators because it was quote unquote cheating. I use this example all the time. And inevitably, usually the audiences are older. They like I get laughs at that because so many people remember that. But it sounds so stupid now in 2025 when I say that, when we have supercomputers in our pockets, and now you're gonna like we're gonna do the same thing just because to kids, to young kids, or kids that are learning, just because it's quote unquote cheating. That like it's just it's mind-boggling. And not only that, I also think that at the university level, we really have to, I mean, I know college educators are struggling with this themselves. What is the role of the teacher, the professor? There is a role there for sure, but I agree with you. We have to go back and really rethink this whole educational thing.
And I think in both of our lifetimes, we're going to see a lot more trade schools emerge.
Yeah.
So instead of folks picking, a traditional college, I think you're actually going to see people specifically directly going into a trade school. So again, I think you're going to see a whole business around the education piece of it. And you're going to see universities, I think, struggle to get applications in it and people enrolling.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if I mean, I look at both my nephews on the other side of the family. Um, they left college with tens of thousands of
Yeah.
dollars in debt, and I yeah, I just don't know. Like, it's just unfair, and then you really, not that we, this is not the topic for this podcast, but you peel back what is like the just massive growth in administration at these universities and the facilities and the infrastructure. I was like, no wonder, like it's becoming these like it just anyway.
It's key. It has been often keeping up with the Joneses on who
Yeah.
can build the best gym and who can build the best library, and instead of really looking at what are the students actually learning and what skills are they leaving the institution
Well,
with.
and what does it cost? I mean, I went to junior college for the first 2 years, and I think it was $50 a semester. Granted, that was a million years ago, but it probably, well, in some cases it's free now, but it probably, like for inflation, would be like $100 a semester or maybe 200. So, like, that's a huge deal. And I remember when I transferred to UC Irvine, it was $1,300 a quarter, so three
Stick or
quarters.
rock. You were
I know. Like, so it's a 26, 39. So call it 4 grand a year. I mean, if you account for inflation, maybe it's 8 grand a year or something like that. I don't know. Stats are not my thing, but and like that was at a UC, a prestigious, not I mean not prestigious, but I mean
was
that
a
was the more
UC.
expensive. Yeah, it was a UC, which is more expensive than the Cal State. Both my nephews graduated from Cal States and with like 30, 40 grand in debt. It's like, what is happening here?
Yeah. So, how do we want to close out the pod for today? I feel like we've I think for me, my big kind of thought on this topic is I think AI is reshaping what a good job means.
Yeah, yeah. And I also do think I want to highlight one other point that you had made about incorporating technology into the trades and sort of this work is we have somebody give us an estimate on a foundation, and in years past, and some folks that gave us an estimate would come with a tape measure and run the tape along the entirety of our foundation. One guy came and just like doop doop and took, it was electronic measurements. And you just have to think that so much of like there's just a whole set of new tools, which means new innovations to augment what we are doing in in sort of these in these trades, whether it's the roof robot and I keep getting inundated on TikTok with this. one of the big things with you have a circuit breaker is which circuits map to each thing in the house. And so there's some tool, I don't understand what it does, but it keeps popping up on my feed of this
That
tool
TikTok
for
thinks you're obsessed with circuit breakers.
apparently, like I don't even understand them, but so I do think, but also with, like you said, with drones, and there are elements of high tech that will start to really move into, or can you imagine on a job site having little robots? Like
Oh
robots are
yeah.
very quickly becoming tangible, and you could imagine having a foundation dug out with robots,
And somebody
or
has to manage those robots.
exactly. So I think while we say the trades, it doesn't mean just like hammering nails. It could turn into very sophisticated work.